what would really help is additionally is you helping critique these kids, maybe on speaking style, maybe on a way to answer a question. Um, the, these guys will compete at the state contest in April. Whoever wins the state contest will go to the national contest. And so it is really important that they get feedback from you about, you know, how did they hold themselves? Were there any annoying little hair flipping things that you would tell me to stop doing? Did you understand their speeches? Did they talk too fast? Any of those kind of assistance where these kids can help so that they can have a very high quality presentation, because the goal is to win state. Last year we played with a team with Mr. Kress. We placed 4th in the national competition, which is a really high honor, and these kids have exactly that goal or better this year at the national competition. So your feedback is incredible to help prepare. John.
You want this on YouTube helpful to you or would it be harmful? I just thought I said probably would.
What do you guys think?
I mean, that's fine. I think it would be great.
Okay.
It would be out there. They will also be able to view themselves.
Yeah, actually, I think that would be good. We'll do the same thing. You guys are going to hear this whole same thing with a different topic with with East on Thursday. So actually, I think being able to see you guys look at the mannerism, I think that'd help you all out. So,
Yeah, that's great.
all right. So let me start. Let me have the kids introduce themselves just so you know who you're talking to, and then we can get started with the content.
So I'm Isabel Leffler. I'm a junior.
My name's Coulter Brokaw. I'm a junior as well. I'm Sean Bassert. I'm also a junior.
I'm Abby Horde, and I'm as well a junior.
We're all juniors.
I'm Emma Berg. I'm also a junior.
I'm Sage Wallace, and I'm a junior also.
I'm Josie Wendland, and I guess you can probably guess this, but I'm also a junior.
Yep.
All right, welcome to class, everyone. I hope everyone has had a good day. As you guys know, today you will be giving your presentations. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I would like you to prepare your presentations. I would like the pros of the question to be seated on this side and the cons on the other. The foundation of this issue was built around the ideals of the American dream. The founding fathers wrote the Constitution in order to allow more freedoms, including life, liberty, and property. Owning land in this time period allowed you more opportunities from those who didn't. Westward expansion began in 1810 when trapping and mining opportunities rose. Moving west took too much time on horseback, so the next option was to use the railroad. The Transcontinental Railroad Act was passed in 1862 in order to unify eastern and western regions and allow opportunity across the country. The land was owned by the state, but economic shortages didn't allow the infrastructure. This is where the problem begins. In a sort of checkerboard pattern way, every other parcel of land where corners meet was given to the railroad, and the rest of the land was left to the General Land Office, now known as the Bureau of Land Management, BLM. Think of it as the red squares were dedicated to the railroad, and the black was for the BLM. This left the rest of the land to be sold back to the state or private landowners. The land was, in fact, sold, but not all at the same time, which then allowed for some parts of this land that were considered public to be surrounded by private squares. This created landlocked public land. The founding fathers did know how to give access to this land due to the canals, what they did with the canals in the south. However, they didn't use this advantage during westward expansion. Fast forward 100 years, we still have this problem with landlocked public land. People who wish to recreate on this land cannot due to the inaccessibility. Students, you have had 2 weeks to work on your presentations. On the pro side of the question, we have a private landowner, a lawyer, and a representative from the Wyoming stock growers. On the con side, we have a recreationist, a employee from the Department of the Game and Fish, and a representative from the Department of the Interior. Let's see what you guys have come up with. Who would like to go first? Yes, Abby, you may start.
Being a private property owner with acreage that landlocks and corner locks public land, when people try to access the public land, it directly impacts my livelihood. The Fifth Amendment, or more specifically the Takings Clause, gives me my private property rights. With this, the right to exclude. Forcing me to allow people to cross corners or go through my land is taking away these rights. A simple way to compare this is imagine someone just walking through your house without your permission. I'm the one responsible for all of the property damage or the disruption to my herd. No one else has to bear this weight. When fences are broken, I have to take time out of my busy day to make repairs. Outfitting is a large portion of my salary. I can make up to $49,000 on outfitters alone. Outfitters won't be continuing to spend roughly $53 million in Wyoming if people are just walking through the land. Trespassers carry food and other supplies with them, and they don't care about the land. It doesn't affect their life, it affects my operation. So when this food or other supplies is dropped, it pollutes my land. And trash doesn't only pose a threat to just my livestock, but also the surrounding wildlife. A large chunk of my property is unable to be fenced in due to the migration patterns of wildlife in the area. Because of this unclear border, people are coming onto my property to get to the public land. I've tried my best by putting up various signs and other things, but these were all ignored and vandalized. The things would only be heightened if corner crossing and going through my land was permitted. The intention the Founding Fathers had for America will be gone. There will no longer be private property. So why are we putting the preservation and beauty of our state at risk? Why should your right to public land access take priority over my private property rights?
Why should your private property rights take priority over my public land access? Being a citizen of Wyoming, it is my constitutional right to hunt, fish, and trap. With that being said, I need to be able to access this public land in order to obtain this right. Landlocked and corner-locked land makes it impossible for me to execute without being cited for trespassing. Thankfully, there are many people around our state and country who are advocating for inaccessible land. As sportsmen, we use resources like the GPS app Onyx. Being the #1 GPS app in the world, Onyx tells you the essential information about the land that you stand on. They put out a report in 2019 capturing the issue of corner crossing and landlocked land. The report says that in the West alone, there are 16.3 million acres of land that is locked. That is the size of 7 Yellowstone National Parks. A big group advocating in Wyoming are the Wyoming backcountry hunters and anglers. Their goal is to conserve the land that we have right now for our future generations. These lands are the backbone to our heritage and values. For hundreds of years, people have lived off the land to provide for their families. Not only does it satisfy their physical need to go explore, but also their emotional health. Being outside lowers the risk of depression and stress, but can increase focus and attention. Our well-being is reliant on accessibility to this land. Your private property has provided for your family for generations. You get to see the beautiful land that you live on every day when you go out to herd cattle and take care of your livestock. I understand where you're coming from, and people crossing over your land can be damaging and costing you money. But on the other hand, people that harvest from the land cannot provide for their family when they're cut off from their resources. So do you really think it is a fight of whose rights are more important?
Excellent. Very well said from both Sage and Abby. Emma, you can go next.
The fight begins with the Takings Clause of the Fifth Amendment, which reads, quote, "Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation," end quote. Now, I'm a constitutionalist, so I take this amendment to heart. I strongly believe and support in what the Founding Fathers wanted. When they founded this country, they wanted the population to be spread out to ensure that not all the wealthy people owned all the land. However, this is where these issues started between public and private land. Fast forward to present day, in the United States, there's this idea that private rights are like a little bundle of sticks. This little bundle of sticks includes all the private property rights, and therefore this bundle of sticks plays a huge role in the lives of constitutionalists and private ranch owners. I am here today representing the Bud Fallon Law Office, and many of my clients have dealt with this issue directly. My clients deal with individuals who not only trespass, but destroy the land at the same time, as we heard from our rancher's point of view. My clients have put up multiple barriers that state that trespassing is illegal, but these individuals and hunters choose to ignore it. With this issue of corner crossing, there's a huge legal gray area.
Can you go more into depth about that legal gray area?
Corner crossing is neither legal nor illegal in the state of Wyoming and in many other western states. According to Statute 23-305, those who corner cross are not guilty. However, according to other statutes like 6-3-303,
Depending on the circumstances, they are guilty. Many opinions have been written on this issue of corner crossing that state when the intent is to hunt, fish, or hike, then it's not illegal. Another issue comes into play, and that issue is airspace. In Wyoming, when an owner has a piece of land, they also own 500 feet of air above that land. Therefore, when an individual chooses to corner cross, they are essentially entering that airspace and still trespassing. Many arguments have been made that it is illegal because when you enter that airspace, it is altering the natural state of that private land. Another issue comes into play that game and fish wardens across the West are not able to give citations for corner crossing, nor are they allowed to allow corner crossing. The law is clearly written, so why aren't we fixing it?
But the problem is the law is so unclear. Landlocked land creates disputes between landowners and sportsmen, and it makes managing wildlife populations a nightmare. The Wyoming Game and Fish Department's law enforcement officers are only responsible for enforcing hunter trespass laws. On the contrary, game wardens cannot write citations for criminal trespass. However, lines get blurred between these two statutes, and game wardens often get calls to handle both. When game wardens get called to handle criminal trespass they cannot enforce, it costs the department valuable time and resources. Bridging the gap between private landowners and sportsmen is vital to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Although Game and Fish isn't tasked by law with managing state or federal lands, this department is responsible for the conservation of wildlife on everyone's land.
What is Game and Fish doing for inaccessible land?
With 4.16 million acres of public land inaccessible in Wyoming, the Game and Fish has been paving the way in gaining public access. This department has utilized Access Yes, an incentive program that takes funds from game tax sales, conservation stamps, and the department's own budget to pay willing landowners for public access to their property. Access Yes has opened up 2 million acres for public use in Wyoming. The department also owns an additional 450,000 acres used for wildlife habitat and sportsmen's access. We can encourage sportsmen to respect private property by being responsible and to leave no trace. This helps the department fulfill its mission of conserving wildlife and serving people.
Yes, Sean.
Conservation of wildlife? What about the conservation of private property? While representing the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, I have been in charge of protecting the Wyoming agricultural interests. This includes their economic, legislative, regulatory, judicial, environmental, and cultural values. These private landowners put their trust in me to ensure that both their land and property are protected. Hearing this talk of allowing corner crossing is mind-blowing to me because the sections of land that are land in corner locked is not our problem. And for those of you asking that we just allow people to walk across the property or hop a fence without permission is violating their rights. Now, private property rights are sometimes referred to as a bundle of sticks, some of which include the right to exclude others and the right to protect your property. These rights are not only listed under our state constitution, but the United States Constitution. The only way to combat this right is if there is a license giving access to the public for business purposes. Now, talking about access, land grants from Congress, also known as the checkerboard lands, only reserve this right to access for mineral rights, meaning if there's minerals, oils, or fossils found on your property, the state is allowed to enter your land to collect them. However, they only reserve this right to access for minerals, not the public. Now, according to a brief written by Karen Bud Fallon, some argue that if Congress would have known that a portion of the land grants would be inaccessible to the public today, then they would have reserved this right to access. But according to this brief, quote, the courts are not allowed to amend the law to fit what the court thinks Congress may have intended had Congress known what we do today, end quote. So if Congress can't change for the people, why should we?
Jesse, it's your turn.
The Department of the Interior plays a key role in how the United States manages and maintains its public lands. Unfortunately, a great deal of public lands managed by the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and several other agencies are hard to maintain and sometimes totally impossible to access due to them being either completely landlocked or corner locked. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act, or FLPMA, gave the BLM the multiple use mandate. The mandate states, quote, that the resources and uses on public land must be utilized in a balanced combination that will best meet the needs of the people, end quote. Everyone in the U.S., from the rancher to the environmentalist, has a say in how public lands are managed. There are also dozens of laws and congressional acts that influence public land management. Every major land use decision the BLM makes is run by land use planning, which is established in FLPMA. It is one of the most important tools the agency has, and it ensures that public lands are managed consistently and creates opportunity for public involvement. A wrench is thrown into all of this when you consider how how landlocking and corner locking play into this. Areas such as the Wyoming checkerboard are perfect examples of landlocked and corner locked land. Management of resources and animals are so much more difficult than they need to be in these areas due to inaccessibility. Now, some may say that land swapping is the solution to all of this, when in reality it's nearly impossible to do. Land swapping is the exchange of attractive public land for attractive private land to allow for better and freer access to public land. The federal government tries to help all they can with this, but according to FLIPMA, any tract of land that they are going to remove has to meet specific criteria to even be considered for disposal. To further this, any land that is going to be swapped has to serve the same purpose as the tract of land that the federal government is going to get rid of. This means both tracts of land need to have the same historical and cultural value, and in most cases, that just isn't possible.
Thank you all so much for your hard work on your presentations. We heard good points from both sides. We first heard from Abby as a private property owner who expressed her concerns about trespassing onto private land. Then from Sage with the point of a recreationist who is advocating for the accessibility of public land. We then heard from Emma, who added the viewpoint of a lawyer with a constitutionalist angle to bring, who represents landowners across the West, and then from Coulter on the side of the Game and Fish Department to bring light into the conservation of Wyoming wildlife. Next, we saw the views from Sean as a representative for the Wyoming Stock Growers Association to the fall of Congress in granting public land access. And lastly, we heard from Josie from the Department of the Interior to show the complexity of federal land management and land swapping. So I ask you, should private property rights be able to block public land access? Thank you.
Okay, so now normally, when I say teammate one, you guys are their second presentation. It will be fully memorized. So if they read or stumbled over a word, give a little grace because we just did these. Second, then they normally, so that they can hear, they normally step down in front to ask questions. But if you guys would ask your questions, they'll stand up and answer.
Stay up there, we'll be able
Yes.
Any questions? I have a question for you. The issue with the road system out there now, developing the minerals, okay? Many of these roads that access these specific mineral sites go across BLM and private ground. So what's your opinion on the ability to use the road system that is out there to access these other, because they are going across private property through an easement of that site specific, or is that open to the public?
So I have looked into this kind of issue. So there is areas where there is easement roads or there's specific trails that allow people to walk across private property to get to a public square. But the problem with this is to build some of these roads, it just costs way too much. Some of the landowners are not willing to actually give up these easements in order for people to be able to drive across and actually access a public parcel. There's a video out there, it's called #Project Landlocked that we've watched. And what this guy does is in order to get to one section of private land, he needs to take a helicopter and fly over 3 other sections of private property. And now if there would have been a road that would have allowed him to access, it would have been way easier. But the whole problem is that it is way too expensive and way too hard to allow these easement roads to get to all this public access. It's just not actually plausible and as easy as we want it to be. Oh.
I'm more specific in the checkerboard out there where the federal minerals are being developed. And there's many roads across private sections to get to the federal mineral section.
So in my speech, I talked directly about the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment, which says that private property should not be taken for public use without just compensation. So the way that I see that is that if someone is going to go across my private land to get to different federal lands for mineral rights, then they would have to pay me a certain amount of money that would be plausible to me, because with the Fifth Amendment it says without just compensation. So for me, that would be, they would have to pay me a certain amount of money to get to those mineral rights if they had reserved it. As we heard from Josie's speech,
that BLM deals directly with those mineral rights, and so if they did give me money for that, then I wouldn't be opposed to it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How accurate are the GPS units that are available to the public? Within how many feet are they accurate?
So when we look at Onyx, they are pretty accurate. The app tells you about like who owns the land and things like that, and they're accurate within about 10 feet that we found out. So if you do end up like accidentally trespassing, I don't think that you're still trespassing, but you're probably only like a few feet into the property and you can turn around and go back if there's no fence, but they are pretty accurate apps.
Follow up with the question, where the road is already across private property to get to the mineral rights, is that road, now that the landowner has been compensated, is that now a public road?
I still think that it is private, or the road itself is public, but then there's just that unspoken rule that whoever's on that road is not trespassing onto my private land, and part of that just compensation could be that the federal gives me a fence to put up around that road to prevent people from trespassing onto my land. Or in Wyoming, there are such laws with cattle that if they are to hit one of my cattle on an open range area, then it is their fault. And so I think it would deal with a bunch of different laws with if it trespassing in those certain areas, and then Game and Fish gets involved with how they can't necessarily give citations for certain trespassing, but I think it would be still a public road, but there would have to be some circumstances with private areas. And I do know this, that if this road is made for just mineral access, for people who are trying to get to those minerals, that road is closed off to part of the public and only allows certain people that are going to gain those mineral rights.
In the corner crossing from this directly to a sportsman, you're in a checkerboard situation. You have no agreement between the wildlife services and the private and the BLM in this situation. You're on a hunt, you wound an animal, goes onto the private property. What do you do in that instance?
So this actually happened to me this year, or last year when I killed my bull elk. I shot the elk on private land and then it went onto a lease. And actually my uncle owns the lease, but since our name is not directly on the lease, I still had to call him to tell him that my dead animal, the animal that I harvested, ran onto his private lease, and I had to call him and ask him, can I go onto your land to harvest my animal? So we were just talking about this with the Game and Fish. If you harvest an animal and they cross onto private property, you still have to gain access by the private landowner. And if they deny you access, you can call the Game and Fish or Game Warden, and they can come and deal with the problem for you so that you can still harvest your animal.
My concern here is that it seems to be a very adversarial, contentious attitude between the private landowners and the recreationists. And we deal with this quite often in the legislature. We get emails from folks complaining about not having access to these federal lands across private land. But it's been my experience that if the recreationist will develop a relationship with the private landowner, you can do a lot of things. You may have to help them brand or help build some fence or something, but just show your interest in the private land, because those private landowners, they provide forage and water for wildlife all the time. So these are just a couple of things that we need to consider. And having the ability to access private land is really important to recreationists, but at the same time, the private landowner's got to be protective of his resources there and his livelihood.
How will you hold?
Just a minute. All right, that was 7 minutes, you guys. Just so you get a feel for question. All right, keep going. I just wanted to let the kids know that.
That's what they're allowed, is 7 minutes,
Yes,
the judges.
yeah. For these, we want to keep answering questions so that they get to practice answering the questions. But in the competition, it's 7 minutes, and I just want to give the kids a feel for how much you got. So keep talking. Sorry to interrupt.
Not much time for a complex issue.
Nope.
How are you guys going to hold accountability if there are these roads built across private property and recreationists can drive on these roads and they're throwing trash out their windows or they cut through a fence or something like that, and there's really no way to tell who actually is causing damage to the property? How are you going to settle with that issue?
I think the best way for to avoid those situations is for the private property owner to put up cameras or put up their signs and do their very best to fix this. And if recreationists are disrespecting this property, it's really hard for the private property owner to, deal with it because there's no way to tell, like you said. And so it's just really hard. And that's the best. They try their best in what they can do, but inevitably there's always going to be something wrong. And that's where our issue comes into play. So thank you.
Do you think getting cameras and things like that will be expensive?
Yes,
For
and
landowners, that seems like a lot of additional cost.
it is. It really is. And that is why this is such a big issue. What?
I just wanted to add on to the point of that. When in the circumstances with taking clause, you have to have just compensation. The whole point of it is if there is access roads being built 10 feet off, I believe, on each side of the road is technically the state's land. So if something gets damaged or if there's pollution or anything like that, the state is actually required to come in and clean it up and fix it for you because of that just compensation. These access roads, some of them, when they deal with it, this does happen. So the private landowner then has to contact the state, tell them what happened. The state can come on and they have to fix it due to that takings clause.
So, are you, just to clarify, because I asked Brian Nesbitt a question like this, are you asking how they figure out who trespassed? Like, who did the damage to their property or threw the trash out their window? Is that kind of what you're asking, or just?
Not necessarily who did it, because I think that would be nearly impossible to track, but just how do you make the landowner whole when things like that do happen?
Okay.
And what about we heard from this, I'd say, maybe more more compensation.
Yeah.
On the recreationist side, how do you plan on making sure that other recreationists are being responsible? Because if you're going to be going through private property, the community of recreationists as a whole should want to be,
Yeah.
model citizens and respect that property.
So I think that I gotta stand up. I grew up hunting with my dad, and he hunted his whole life. And I think that we see a lot more of this damaged property in younger generations, like our age people, or maybe a little bit older. And I think that they weren't taught how to respect land or private property, because when I hunted with my dad, we always got permission from private property owners, and he always told me, be respectful of their land, and just like Game and Fish tells you, leave no trace. Pick up your trash, pick up all your trash, make sure that you have it all, and understand that that is not your land, and you would not be happy, say, if somebody went to your house and trashed your land. That's the way that he taught me, and I think that we need to start advocating to younger generations who maybe didn't grow up around hunting but got into it when they were older, that that is not your land to disrupt or pollute.
To add on her point, I don't think it should fall on the landowner's shoulders to have to, fix their fence or repair damages, pick up trash. They should get justly compensated for those damages. I think as a community, hunters need to hold each other accountable, over the dinner table. If you're talking to your buddies and yeah, I trash property, you should hold those people accountable for doing that, because that's not okay. That takes away access for us, and it just makes us look bad as a whole. Now, of course, there's going to be bad apples who are going to do that. It's going to happen. It's a reality. However, I think we need to, like she mentioned, we need to educate younger generations to really, be responsible when you're out there and recreating.
If a private landowner, perhaps for several decades, has allowed public access across a certain area, a certain place on their private land to access public land, and and then the private land changes ownership, and the new owner comes in, says no more access. Should that new owner have the right to do that, or should there be some type of a adverse possession or a public right that was established over time that cannot be taken away from them?
So if it changed ownership, that landowner has every right to not allow access. However, if there's been kind of, a not perceived, but if there's been public access before, the Game and Fish will want to work with that landowner to keep providing access, and Game and Fish pays a lot of money a year to landowners to pay for that access, but at the end of the day, that landowner does not have to give access. Thank you.
I have a question for the private landowner. Are your fences really online or are they on me? You know exactly where your fences are as I am hunting. I'm using my GPS and I cross that fence that is on top of the ridge when your property line is really only 2/3 of the way down. How do you address that?
So the Onyx is still gonna compensate for even no matter where my fence line is. So if you still cross the property and you leave a trace, I'll still like be able to tell, if that makes sense. So like, okay, let me word this better. So everywhere on my property, there's signs or some way telling you that that is my private property line, whether it's a stake, whether it's a sign, whether it's something. And the Onyx app, as she said, are pretty accurate. So it shouldn't be, my fence line shouldn't really be the indicator of that. That makes sense.
Oh, then where are you placing these signs? On the fence line or 100 foot down the side of the hill where your property line actually does it?
As I said in my speech, they're on my property line to make it clear that that is where my property is.
I know that the Fallons, they have this issue specifically, and they put up boulders that say no trespassing private property, and those have been vandalized. And so that is kind of what our private property owner has dealt with, is putting up boulders and signs like that on her private property. I saw when we had just started this issue, in government class, we were looking into bills that our House and Senate would be looking at this year. And I saw that you guys, maybe not you guys, but that there was one about putting up fence posts with just a sign that says no trespassing. And so I think that a good option, instead of putting up a fence, if you cannot, just put up a fence post and the line of where it would be, putting a no trespassing sign up. I was gonna say something else, but then I forgot.
I think we've got time if there would be any coaching out there. Anybody? That's I guess I would say. If you start to stumble a little bit, I think it's appropriate to pause. You don't have to say you're sorry, because all of us have stumbled on what we're trying to say. I know you're in a time restraint. And you did a great job. Oh, Sage, a proper response, I think, on other people's trash for the responsibility under trash. The landlord doesn't stay somebody else. Anything else? All right, really a good job. Thank you.
The mineral, the roads and the rights into it, we just haven't got to that yet, but it's so complex, there's just a lot. I wrote a lot down today that's going to help us, but isn't it nice to see that there's still young adults that care a little bit, and they don't come from a real private property, big ranch type agriculture background, but they care. But they're right, we have to start with kids this age and educate them, have people that are willing to go out and So thank you, and yes, we're gonna be a lot more ready in a month, but that was awesome, but, man, what a great set of kids. You just gotta keep learning, it's complex, isn't it? There's a lot to this. And it's just gonna get more complex with population booms and less people in private land and more public every year. So 20 years from now, it's a bigger issue than it is today, so thanks for allowing us to take some time with you today and learn.
And Tommy Chris is their ag. Sorry. I don't think we all got everybody introduced. Tommy was also my daughter's ag teacher many years ago, and they won it.
We've always worked with the Fallons, which is great because, well, I don't know very much. I just run in circles. These guys are way smarter than I am, and then they help us get a lot smarter. So it's a great team. So
Well, it
thank you
gives
for
you
your
hope
time.
for the future. You read all this stuff about young kids, and then I see these kids, and I'm like, okay, maybe my grandkids got a chance, because these guys are gonna be running it soon. These guys are gonna be you soon. And they're so good, so bright.
Good luck.
Thank you.